Well, hey there, my friends. I hope you're having a good day. Hey, don't forget to send questions to questions@lighthousebaptist.net. Would love to hear from you. Would love really just to see what's on your mind. Would love for you to guide our time together a little bit and just tell me how it is you're doing, what it is you're thinking about, so the rest of us can think about it too. Well, I've been thinking about this proverb today. We're still in Proverbs chapter 3, and there's just two verses we're going to consider today. And they read pretty simply. My son, again, that intimate, you think about just a father son, some good advice, I don't know, back porch, out on a fishing trip, sitting at a ball game, whatever. There's that time to connect, and this is just great advice from a father to a son. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof. For the Lord reproves him who he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights. You'll remember that this is something the author of Hebrews picks up on, and says, it quotes this exactly, says, and he's writing to maybe struggling Christians, writing to people who are just grinding it out in the middle of a very difficult life. Following Jesus was very difficult in the first century. It involved persecution, it involved suffering, and so it's interesting that the writer of Hebrews would latch onto this and say, hey, when God is disciplining you, he is treating you as a son whom he loves. And most of us who have sons would say, yes, lots of boys in the world are doing lots of knuckleheaded things, and that's all fine with me, and I feel no sense of responsibility to correct them. But when my sons do things that demand discipline, well, I'm happy to provide that because I want them to go well. It's a function of my love for them. So let's talk a little bit about the discipline of the Lord, and even thinking about what could the writer of Hebrews even be talking about, like persecution from Rome, persecution from the Jews that's making my life more difficult. And as I'm struggling with persecution for righteousness' sake, the author of Hebrews would come in and say, hey, when God is disciplining you, he's treating you as a son. So is the suffering coming from God? Is the persecution coming from God? Is that what's being taught here? I don't think so. Remember, it was for freedom's sake that Christ set us free. A life of living for Christ is a life of freedom in a way that no other life can be, because the primary thing that bogs us all down is self-centeredness, is sin. And it is freedom from sin, freedom from selfishness, that is available only in the kingdom of God, only by the work of the cross. So what is this about the Lord's discipline? Well, let me remind you that discipline is a much broader category than punishment. Punitive discipline is a very small part. The root word of the word discipline is disciple. Man, in fact, if you are in leadership, if you are a coach or a teacher or a parent, or you run an organization, and the people under you, whether they're your kids or your employees or people you're coaching or people in the band you're leading, whatever it is, if they only feel punitive punishment from you, if it is just beatings will continue until morale improves, if it is just, man, we never get any instruction around here, we never get told what to do, we just get yelled at when we do stuff wrong. There's no instruction, there's no leadership, there's only punishment when we screw up. Well, that's not only is that not a good leader, you're going to have unhealthy people under you. Nobody's actually going to end up disciplined. People are going to end up miserable and suffering, but nobody's going to end up discipled, right? So it was for freedom's sake that Christ set us free. Well, how do we fully attain this freedom? Now, I know that the number one way to respond to that is we don't do anything. It's Christ that sets us free. Yeah, amen. But I think we would all say that when we come to Christ, when we enter into a relationship with Christ, that is not the end of our growth. That is the first step in our personal growth. That is how we grow. It is the Holy Spirit that grows us. It is following Jesus' example as a path of life. You remember our faith, the first title of the Christian faith was the way. It wasn't something you just attained. It was a path you were on. It was a discipleship, a following, becoming a student of a rabbi. And so when the Bible uses the word discipline, we're not just talking about punishment. What we're talking about is being discipled by God. And for sure, there are regulations. There is advice. There is a path laid out. You remember Jesus even talked about, look, the wide path is easy to find. There's lots of people walking it. It's well traveled. But this narrow path leads to life. Not many people are going to be walking this kind of way. Not many people are going to be living this kind of life. And I think this is the same idea as the author of Proverbs says, look, son, when God is discipling you, when he is giving you instruction for how to live the best life, man, don't buck against that. Rather, recognize that as love. And it is there's reproof here too in this proverb. Like sometimes we make mistakes. There are consequences for that. We have to acknowledge that as love as well. But there's more than just reproof here. There's discipline. So the Christian life requires many categories of discipline. I would say it requires a disciplined mind. We're told to capture every thought and present it to Christ. Hey, God, this is the way I feel about myself. Is this right? Hey, God, this is the way I feel about my neighbor. Is this right? Hey, God, this is the way I feel about my purpose in the world. Is this right? Hey, God, this is the way I'm feeling about any number of activities or behaviors. Is this right? That every thought needs to come captive to the gospel. So we're also told that we have to have our minds transformed. And there's a mystical spiritual aspect of this where it is God that is transforming our mind, but there is a ton of discipline involved in that. That our minds do not accidentally become transformed. Our minds are transformed as we conform and Christ is formed in us. That we continually are submitting our minds to the will of God. And not only that, we are continually using our minds, like pressing our minds into the study of God. Our minds are not transformed as we say, well, I asked Jesus into my heart and now I'm never thinking about him. Rather, our minds are transformed as we're meditating on Christ, as we're learning about the scriptures, as we are becoming experts in this book and in knowing how to hear from God and how to hear from God in a way that aligns with this book. So our minds must go from the way we initially thought, full of selfishness and self-centeredness, the way the world wants us to live, looking out for number one, fighting for our side, all of that. And our mind instead has to be transformed until we are conformed to the image of God. So it takes mental discipline. You're going to have to read better books. You're going to have to read this book. Don't just read about God. Don't just read about the Bible. Read the Bible. Read it a lot. Most of the people that I admire most in the faith, the teachers and historical figures and whatever, their practice was they just read the Bible all the time. There was none of this like getting through the Bible in a year stuff. They were constantly in the Bible, read it over and over and over until they really internalized it, knew what this book was about. That's the discipline of the mind. It's also training those old thoughts and saying, nope, that's not a godly idea. That's not the way Jesus wants me to think about myself or other people. This takes discipline. And the Proverbs would say, man, if you're on this road of discipline, don't buck against it. Receive it as love. Know that this is for your good. I would also say there's a discipline of, let's call it a discipline of purpose, where we go from being fishermen to fishers of men, where we go from representing ourselves and representing our families and representing our country and all of that to rather being ambassadors for Christ. That the primary thing we are doing in the world is representing Christ to the world. And again, we talk about this a ton, especially in these little videos. I've brought it up a lot, but the initial idea of humanity is that we were to image God to the world. And as we take on this label of Christian, as we say, yes, I'm going to follow Christ, we are reclaiming this original idea that we will be an ambassador to the world of who God is. Now that takes a great deal of discipline, because there might be things that In and of yourself, if you were just representing yourself, there are a lot of people that you would think deserve a piece of your mind. But rather you say, no, I'm representing God here. I'm going to act with grace. I'm going to act with forgiveness. I'm going to keep quiet because I'm not just representing myself. I'm not just trying to get my side to win here. Rather, I'm trying for people to say, oh, that's a godly dude. He's representing. I'm getting to know God as I'm getting to know Grant. And quite frankly, that takes a lot more forgiveness than representing myself. It takes a lot more grace. It takes a lot more smiling. It takes a lot more kind words than just purely representing myself. That takes discipline. It takes discipline of our body too. Paul said that he disciplined his body so that after he preached, he might not miss out on what he was preaching for. That he wouldn't be worthy after he preached. Man, that's convicting. That we would be people who honor God with our mind, with our purpose, with our hearts, and with our bodies. And so there's a lot of discipline. It is for freedom's sake that Christ set us free, but the most disciplined people are the freest people. You've heard me use these examples before, but you might see somebody who sits down at a piano and man, they are free. Just yell out a song and they can play it. They play while they're telling jokes and they don't have to concentrate too much on it. And they're just beautiful, dynamic, and there's an emotion in their playing. Well, did they just sit down one day and do that? I mean, a small fraction of people that happened. For most people who play with freedom, it was built on years and years and years of discipline. If you see somebody who is good at any skill, it's like that. If you have a friend, I have a friend who's great with cars, just stick his head under the hood and can see what's going on. I have no idea what's going on, and he can just kind of, listen to it, look at it and go, I think this is what it is. Well, how does he have that kind of freedom? Well, it was built on years and years and years of sticking his head under hoods of cars. That is a discipline that leads to freedom. So in the same way, as I discipline my sons, I don't discipline my sons so they know I'm the boss. I discipline my sons so they'll live a life of freedom. So that when they grow up, they won't struggle with bad decision making and with sin and with all of the things that the world would have for them, but rather they have the freedom of right thinking, faithful living, and peace of mind and peace in their heart. That's why discipline's there, because freedom is built on discipline. So, when it comes to the discipline of God, a Christian life is a very disciplined life. We discipline our minds, we discipline our bodies, we discipline our purpose, we discipline ourselves. And whenever you're talking about discipline, I not only have I coached a lot of people, I, played a lot of stuff, and I think about, man, I had some coaches that were strong disciplinarians, and I played tennis in high school, and you wouldn't think, tennis practice is mostly just playing tennis, but you play tennis for 3 hours a day and the drills are hard. We had a football stadium in my school and we used to have to run the stadium up and down with our rackets over our heads. And there's nothing, you got football players on the on the football field who think us tennis guys are not the toughest guys in the world anyway. And then there we are running up and down the stadium with our rackets over our heads. And man, I remember the burn in my arms and my burn in my legs. But when you get on the court, all of that discipline bears the fruit of being able to be a better tennis player. It's like that in our spiritual lives too. Discipline yourself. Do what it takes to have a disciplined mind, a disciplined schedule, a disciplined budget, a disciplined body, a disciplined life. So on top of that discipline will be built freedom. So I was saying there are two perspectives on discipline. In the middle of it, you usually don't like it, right? In the middle of it, you usually go, man, I don't want to run up and down these stairs with my racket over my head, or I don't want to wake up early to read the scriptures, or I don't want to keep my mouth shut when somebody's saying something dumb. I want to tell them what they deserve to hear. And if you keep your eye on the discipline, on the discipleship, many times you buck against it. But the mature person, the wise person, that's why this father in Proverbs is saying, hey son, here's the wiser way to look at it. Instead of looking at the discipline, look at the results. Look at the reward. Don't be running up and down those stairs going, I hate running up and down the stairs, but instead be running up and down those stairs going, man, we're going to be good at tennis. Don't be setting that alarm early and waking up and going, I hate waking up early. Rather set that alarm, wake up early, read the scriptures, not so you go, well, I hope God's not mad if I check the box of reading the scriptures, but rather say, man, the discipline that I'm putting in now is going to equal peace in my heart and joy in my life. So for these people to whom the author of Hebrews is writing, he's saying, look, he's not saying God is causing the persecution in their lives, but he's saying, look, the discipline that you have to live for Christ is bearing the fruit of suffering right now. God is not causing the suffering. It's the Romans and Jews and whoever is persecuting you that's causing the suffering. But what is making it a reality in your life is this discipline that you have to follow Christ. And he's saying, look, that's going to produce peace and joy in your heart. That's going to produce love. This is going to bear the fruit of freedom. Even though right now, because there's evil people in the world, it hurts. So guys, I don't know what part of discipline you struggle with. I certainly am preaching to myself. I know the pieces of discipline I struggle with. And as we go through our day-to-day, let's be people who don't view the discipline of the Lord as something to be bucked or something to be hated, but rather let's experience it as the love of God teaching us to live the freest life. Have a great day.